place yet for your vegetable garden, you want to be thinking, where in my yard gets the most sun? Okay, now unfortunately, now is not really the best time to be determining what places in your yard get sun. And the reason for that is the sun is lower in the winter, it's higher in the summer, and so there will be places now that aren't getting sunlight that will be getting sunlight in the summer. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, the second thing that you need to think about when you're placing your garden or your raised beds or your pots or however you're going to plan to grow food, you always want to air closer to the house, okay? Because if the garden is located in the back 40, you're not going to go there, right? So you want it close to the house. You want it somewhere that is convenient for you. You get bonus points if you can see the garden from a window, okay? First of all, it just makes you happy to look out the window and see what you're growing. And second of all, you're far more likely to be active in your garden if you can see what's going on, okay? So some things to think about as far as where to put your garden. Now, I mentioned there are different types of gardens and ways to grow. So the three that came to mind were growing in the ground, the traditional garden, like your parents or grandparents had. We can grow in raised beds, and we can grow in containers. And they all have pros and cons. And so I wanted to just throw some of these out at you so that you can make an easier decision based on what's going to work the best for you. So most traditionally, we have growing in the ground. Now, the pros to growing in the ground are that you don't have to buy soil, right? Unless, I will say this, if you live in a development, they probably took all of the good topsoil away when they were building the houses, and what you're left with is just dead dirt, okay? So if you live in a development, you may have to buy soil, right? The garden is going to have the best retention of water, especially when it's mulched, and that is because maybe even retention of water isn't the best way to say it, but plants growing in the ground can send their roots out to get water, okay? So the ground is probably going to be your best bet during drought years, or if you live in a place that doesn't typically get rain during growing season, okay? Here in New England, we're usually pretty good, right? There are usually thunderstorms that come through, dump a bunch of rain, we're good to go. Last year was an exception, right? That was a drought year. It was no bueno as far as the water goes. But another pro to growing in the ground is that, like I mentioned, the roots can grow and find water. They can also grow and find the nutrients that they need, okay? So that's growing in the ground, the pros. The cons is that this way of growing is going to be the worst as far as weeds go, okay? Starting out on your garden means you're probably going to have to conquer grass, okay? Because most of us, if we want to grow a garden, there's grass there now, and you're going to have to deal with that, whether it's laying down cardboard and killing off the grass that way, or tilling. Somehow you're going to have to get rid of that grass. Another con is that drainage can be an issue. If you're in wet areas, your plants might drown, right? And sometimes the soil isn't the best. So you might need to amend your soil with lots of nutrients and organic matter, and we'll talk about that later. But if you're not growing in good soil, that can be a con. And finally, in New England, rocks are an issue, right? So my garden right now is located in a place that has been a garden for 60 years, and we are still digging rocks out, okay? New England grows good rocks, and so that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with if you're growing in the ground. So if you choose to grow in the ground, what I would highly recommend that you do is that you make permanent walkways so that you are not compacting the soil when you walk on them. And I will show you a picture in a minute of what that looks like. When you walk on the soil, it compresses it. It affects the microorganisms that are in the soil, and it's not ideal. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why raised beds might be a great option, but we'll get to that. All right, so let's show you what my in-ground garden looks like. Okay, so over here on the right-hand side, this is what the garden looked like shortly after we took it over. Now, I mentioned it's been a garden for 60 years. It was a traditional garden. It got plowed and tilled every year, right? And I didn't want that. Okay, I wanted permanent beds that we could grow in, that had nice, fluffy, good soil. And so we made the permanent walkways. So these hills right here are the beds that we're growing in. And then the little valleys are the walking areas. Okay, so each of these rows are 30 feet long. They are 30 inches wide. And then the walkways are 18 inches wide. Okay, that's a pretty standard measurement as far as the width of the beds and the walkways. There are tools that are 30 inches wide because that's the standard. And so that's why I chose to go 30 inches. You can see here, right, even after 60 years, we were still digging rocks out of the soil. Every spring, we have more rocks to harvest. Okay, so this was the first year, and we had 17 of these rows. This was last year when we were getting ready to expand. So this is in the fall, right here on the left-hand side. So you can see right here where the pointer is, that is a bunch of shredded leaves. And what those shredded leaves are doing is that they are killing the grass. So I was thinking ahead. I knew I wanted to expand the garden. And so we piled shredded leaves here so that the grass would not grow below it. And that was actually a very neat idea. Okay, the piling leaves on the ground, not my idea. But what happened was this spring, I raked those leaves aside and I put potatoes on the ground. I covered them with a little bit of compost, and then I put the leaves back. And the potatoes grew fantastically, and it was really easy to harvest them. Okay, so I was killing two birds with one stone here. The leaves were killing the grass. It was making sure there was nothing growing there. But then I put the potatoes there. Okay, and so their roots kind of went through the hard pan and loosened things up. And so then the next season, we are able to put soil here and make this another bed, and we don't have to worry about grass anymore because the grass is gone. Okay, so shredded leaves are your friend no matter what kind of gardening you're doing. All right. Next type of gardening is raised beds. So most of you have seen these if you've looked at Pinterest or Instagram or any sort of gardening pictures. Raised beds are beautiful. They're just beautiful. There's nothing like raised beds, right? So the pros are you have total control of the soil that goes inside those beds, right? You don't have to worry if your ground is terrible. You can buy good soil, put it in those beds, and you are off and running. In the beginning, there's less weed pressure, right? Because the wind hasn't blown them in. Hopefully the soil that you bought was weed-free, and so there's definitely less weeds to worry about. In this house that we're living in right now, we have some raised beds. And what I found is that the grass is coming through on the sides, right? And then every year the wind blows more weed seeds in, right? So just because you're growing in raised beds doesn't mean you're not going to have weed pressure. It just means you're going to have less of it. Another pro of raised beds is that it makes drainage better. So if you know that your ground tends to be wet, raising the garden off of the ground can help with drainage, so your roots aren't staying wet. And another pro of raised beds is that the soil actually warms faster in the spring. And the warmer the soil is in the spring, the earlier you can plant. So the cons of the raised beds, the number one con is the cost of the materials to build them, right? You're going to have to bring the soil in. You're going to have to find something. Most people use wood, but you can use cement blocks. There's a bunch of options as far as, you know, walling off the raised beds. I put here pressure treated with question marks because once upon a time the rule was do not use pressure treated lumber to build your raised beds because they're treated with all kinds of chemicals and you don't want those chemicals leaching into the soil and then into the food that you're going to eat. I have heard that they are no longer pressure treating with such awful chemicals, so it may not be an issue anymore. I haven't done that research, all right? So if you are thinking about doing raised beds, that's something that you might want to look into. A lot of people use cedar because it will last longer in the weather. But that's something for you to think about with raised beds. Now with raised beds, I will also tell you this. I know from experience, do not make your beds more than 3 feet wide. And the reason for that is you want to be able to reach into your garden and harvest and take care of whatever's in there. And the average arm span is 3 feet, right? So you can reach plants, you can plant, you can weed, you can harvest without having to step into those beds again and compact the soil, okay? The other thing that you want to be aware of is you don't want to build them too long without having supports in the middle because they will end up bulging on you. So here's some pictures, a picture for you. This was my garden in Virginia. I did not build it. It was there. It was part of the reason we fell in love with the house. So the gentleman that we bought the house from built this. And as you can see, basically these beds, all of the beds were 3 feet wide, which was fantastic. But what he did was he put them together with no walkway in the middle here. And so I could not reach the stuff that was growing in the back of the beds. Okay, it was too long of a reach for me. So I ended up having to step into the beds, which is a no-no. All right. So if you're thinking about raised beds, make sure you separate them so that you can reach in from all areas. As you can see, yeah.
So 3 feet wide. What's the other dimension?
Whatever you want.
Okay.
Just make sure if you're using a long piece of lumber that you have some support in the center because it'll start to bulge from the pressure of the soil if it's too long, okay? These beds right here, I believe were 15 feet long, and these on this side were 12 feet long. Okay, so again, it's totally dependent on your space and you know what you want to invest in materials.
Did you feel 15 feet was too long?
No, I didn't. I could walk the length of each of these and it was fine. It was just the depth, having them back to back like that with no walkway in the middle did not work for me.
Okay, thank you.
You know, if it was my husband gardening, he wouldn't have had an issue because he has monkey arms. So again, just something to be aware of that you don't want to make them too deep. Okay. You can see over here, these trellises were where I grew my cucumbers. And the reason for that is cucumbers can be space hogs. I had limited amount of space in this garden and I wanted to make the most of it. So cucumbers love growing up. And so this was really easy to set up. And it worked out because the cucumbers grew up here and they didn't take up any of the bed space, and I could use it for other things. All right, so that's in the ground. We talked about
Lynette,
raising. Yep.
did you put those trellises in, or what are they made of? Like, how are they constructed?
Okay, so I bought the netting. The netting is pretty easy, and I think this was 6-inch netting. You can get whatever size netting you want. I forget, Hun, do you remember what this metal is called? He's not listening to me. They were metal poles that we bought at Home Depot, right? Like the 1-inch, what, conduit? Conduit. He says conduit. They were like 1 inch. I think what we did is we pounded some rebar stakes in the ground, and then we put the conduit over the rebar to hold it upright. And then they sell the little elbows to connect them at the top. So it was a very cheap project to take on. It wasn't anything complicated.
Thank you for
Okay,
asking.
thank you.
I was actually thinking the same thing. Do you think you could post that?
I will find a link to something similar.
Thank you. I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Thank
So
you.
you can see here, these white hoops are PVC. Okay, they were just, I think PVC comes in 8-foot lengths, and we cut them. Again, we pounded little pieces of rebar into the ground and kind of hooked the PVC over them. And the reason that we wanted these hoops was because, well, there's 2 reasons. In Virginia and here, okay, so this isn't anything you won't see here. We had terrible problems with cabbage moths, and they chewed the cabbage, they chewed the broccoli, like anything in the cabbage family, they're gonna chew. And so what I did is I bought a 50-yard bolt of, I don't even know how to say it, tulle or toile, or the wedding, you know, the stuff they use for veils. I bought a bolt of that from Joann's, and I covered the row. Okay, so what happens is the water can still get in, the light can still get in, but the cabbage moths cannot touch the plants in order to lay their eggs. And so it protected the cabbage family plants from those moths. The other thing that these hoops do is that they allow you to extend the season, because instead of the tulle, you can put plastic over them, all right? And it acts as a mini greenhouse. So in Virginia, this was amazing gardening down there. Like, I had stuff growing in my garden I was harvesting 11 months out of the year. And so I would put plastic over these hoops to protect my lettuce and get my lettuce through the coldest nights in Virginia. And that worked really well as well. So your options with raised beds are pretty neat, right? You can do the trellising, you can grow up. You could put tomatoes on these trellises. They're multi-purpose, as are these little hoops here made out of PVC. Okay, so in the ground, raised beds, containers are next. So the pros of growing in containers is that you can easily move them anywhere, right? You can move them to follow the sun. You can move them where you want them to be. You can put them close to the house where you might not put a garden. And it's very, very easy to get started. You just go to a store and you buy some containers and you buy some soil and you're good to go, right? So very easy. The cons of containers: number one, you need to be very, very good about watering and fertilizing. And the reason for that is the roots can't grow where they need to in order to get water and nutrients, all right? They are stuck in this pot. So you are the one who is responsible for making sure this plant gets what it needs. Another con is that it can be expensive, okay? Potting soil is expensive. The pots themselves are expensive. And like I put a star here, okay? Because you must use potting soil and not garden soil. Garden soil is too heavy to really grow well in pots. So if you are going to grow in containers, you want to look for potting soil because it will be better at holding water. It's a lighter medium and it's better for the roots of the plants. The big thing that you have to remember with containers is that you always have to make sure there are drainage holes at the bottom, okay? Because like I mentioned, if we get one of those downpour thunderstorms in the middle of July and you don't have drainage holes in the bottom of your containers, your plants are going to be swimming and roots do not want to be wet, okay? So some of the pots come with holes in the bottom, most of them do not. So you're just going to have to get the drill out and put some holes in. And it doesn't have to be a ton. You just want to make sure that there's a way for the excess water to get out, okay? Now, a lot of people have heard that you should put something in the bottom of the pot, usually it's rocks, to help with drainage. This is a bad idea. Do not do it. First of all, it makes the containers really heavy, and they're heavy enough as it is. But we know now that that actually does not help with drainage. It hinders it, actually. So it's old school. If you talk to old school gardeners, they are going to be putting a layer of something in the bottom of their pots, thinking that they're helping with drainage, and it's really making it worse. Okay. So when it comes to buying your potting soil, you get what you pay for. All right. This is not where you want to go to Ocean State Job Lot and buy the soil. Right. Go to a garden center where they have good soil, especially if you're growing edibles. Okay. Flowers can be a little more forgiving, but if you're growing edibles, they're taking a lot of nutrients. So you need good soil and you need to fertilize them frequently. Now, I will be completely honest and tell you that I am phasing out of container growing. 2 summers ago, I had my whole driveway lined with containers, and I was out there watering at least twice a day. It was out of control. And so I have taken those plants and either I'm not growing them anymore or I found a place for them in the ground. There are a few exceptions, right? My number one exception is mint. Mint is highly aggressive. It will take over if you put it in the ground. If you have a place for it, that's fine. I didn't. So my mint is still in containers. It will always be in containers. Thankfully, mint is a pretty, you can't kill it, really. So if it dries out, you just water it and it comes back. It can take the cold. It's a hardy plant. So mint is easy to grow in containers, thankfully. The other plant that I tend to put in containers is lemon balm for the same reason. It can take over. I love lemon balm. It's one of my favorite things to grow. Thankfully, it is also pretty hardy as well. And so that gets containers. There's not much else that I am growing in containers just because I found them to be so high maintenance. So here's a picture of what my garden looked like when we lived in Guam. Now, basically, the whole island is lava. It's lava rock. There's no good soil on the island. And so I wasn't going to fight it. I knew we were only there for 3 years, so I didn't really want to invest time in amending soil or anything. And so I just grew everything in pots. And so sometimes you have to get creative, right? This, I think, I don't know, I either found it at a yard sale for $1 or somebody was giving it away on the side of the road. It's a kiddie pool, right? Maybe it had a crack in it, which fine with us, right? Because if we're gardening in containers, we need drainage. And so this is a possibility. There's a lot of people growing a lot of neat things in kiddie pools. These were peppers, and I had eggplants, and they did fine. Over here, I'm trying to remember what I had. I think there were figs. This right here is a sweet potato. Now, here, I would never recommend growing sweet potatoes in pots, but in Guam, I was growing them for the leaves. A lot of people don't know that they are edible. They're very good for you. So I was growing the sweet potatoes for the leaves themselves, and so that was that pot. This was a tomato. This is an aloe. One of the great things about living in Guam was that aloe could grow outside all year round. So you can get creative with your pots. Just make sure that they have drainage holes in them and that you are using good potting soil in them. All right.
Can I go back to the mint for a minute, hon?
Sure.
Sure. So I have a whole section of mint. I've dug up quite a bit of it. What should I do with it? I want to save it, but I don't know how.
Okay. So mint is easy. So if you dig it up, you can divide it. You can tear it apart. You don't need to be gentle with it. Tear it apart, put it in pots, and give it to friends. Or you can cut it and stick it in water, and it'll grow roots, and you can pot it and give it to friends. Or you can put them in your drinks, or whatever you're
How
growing.
can I use it for cooking or something? Or like, what do I do with it? I don't even know.
Okay. So you can take the leaves and infuse them in water. It's like iced tea. If you want iced tea, infuse them in iced tea. Or you can just make cucumber and mint. Throw some cucumber and mint in with water, infuse it. Lovely, refreshing drink. What have I done with it? I've made mint syrups that are very good. I'm not really a mint flavor fan. So I'm not exactly the best person to ask as far as that
So
goes.
if anyone wants mint, come to my house this summer or this spring. Take it. I'm digging it all up.
It's
If
invasive.
the garden club, yeah, if the garden club has its plant sale, I will come get some and pot it up, and we'll sell it for the garden club. Okay. But yeah, if I were you, I would dig it all up, assuming you don't want it there. Dig it all up, put it in containers, or just throw it away. Like, don't throw it in a compost pile because it'll take over. But, you can get rid of it. Mint is the only plant that I don't feel guilty throwing away. Okay, any other questions on growing in the ground versus raised beds versus containers? How many of you, is anybody undecided as far as where they want to grow? Or have you mostly figured out, I'm doing raised beds or I'm doing it in the ground? Anyone still have that decision to make?
No, it's already made.
Yeah. All right. So back to the fun now that we've talked about our options. Okay, so the most important part about being a gardener is your soil, right? Because you could be the most attentive gardener in the world, but if you do not have healthy soil, you are not going to be happy with your results, okay? So I cringe when people talk about dirt, because to me, dirt is dead, and you want your soil to be alive, right? It's been said that there are more living things in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. I don't know how they calculate that, but healthy soil contains mineral, it contains water, it contains air, it contains organic matter, it contains microorganisms, and hopefully worms, right? When you are digging around in your dirt, whether it's a raised bed or in the ground, you should be seeing worms, right? when we moved into this house, I didn't know what to expect as far as the soil went. And so I started digging to an area where I wanted to grow herbs. And every time I put that soil in the ground, I brought up worms. And I knew that I was going to be okay. All right. So if you have worms, your soil is probably good to go. Okay, so the first thing that we need to talk about as far as soil goes is the pH, or the acidity of your soil. For vegetable gardening, the ideal pH is going to be somewhere around 6 or 6.5. Okay. Depending on the vegetable, some of them like 5.5, some of them are fine up to 7.5. Okay, but 6 to 6.5 is really the target. As a rule, New England has acidic soil, right? So if you just pick a random place to dig, chances are that pH is going to be much less than 6, okay? And we have to fix that by adding lime or wood ash in order to bring the pH up to where we want it to be. However, number one rule is do not add anything to your soil until you get a soil test. And that will tell you, first of all, what you have enough of and what you need. All right, so it'll tell you what you need to add. It will also tell you how much you need to add. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture in a second of what an actual result from a soil test looks like, and we will talk about all of these things. So let's just put that on the back burner for now. So in addition to pH, the other things that you need to be concerned of are the big three, okay? They're NPK, for those of you who love chemistry. N stands for nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. Okay, now it took me forever to figure out, okay, NPK, which one's potassium, which one's phosphorus? And so finally I realized that it goes in alphabetical order, right? Phosphorus comes before potassium. Okay, so that's how I remember it. The middle is phosphorus, K is potassium. So if you go to any store and you're looking at fertilizers, you're going to see 3 numbers on that bag of fertilizer. Some will look like 235. 10, 10, 10 was my uncle's favorite. He put 10, 10, 10 on everything. Or you might see something like 0, 20, 0, right? So what this means is, let's go back to the 10, 10, 10. All right, this bag of fertilizer contains 10% nitrogen. That's our first number. It contains 10% phosphorus, and it contains 10% potassium. Okay, so these numbers are percents, and it tells you whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. Now, why do we care about this? So what I'm going to tell you is a very general rule of thumb, but it's a good rule of thumb, okay? So nitrogen, the first number, helps us grow shoots or leaves, right? So we want plants to grow good leaves, but not always, right? If I have a tomato plant that's 3 feet tall, I don't want to be feeding it a lot of nitrogen, because when the tomato plant is 3 feet tall, I want tomatoes. I don't want leaves. Okay, so there's a time and a place. The other thing about nitrogen is it's very fleeting. So when you get a soil test, it's not going to measure your nitrogen. We kind of fly by the seat of our pants when it comes to nitrogen. Okay, so I will tell you these tips for nitrogen. If you grow beans or peas, they add nitrogen back into the soil. We call them nitrogen fixers, okay? So they are putting nitrogen back into the soil. Another thing that will put nitrogen in the soil is compost. Coffee grounds will also add nitrogen. If you are a coffee drinker, I am jealous. My husband and I do not drink coffee, and coffee grounds are just so good for your garden, right? Now, some people will say, well, you shouldn't add coffee grounds to your soil because it's going to make it more acid, and we already have acid soil in New England. So basically, the acid in coffee is being leached out of it into the coffee that you're drinking. So by the time you're using the spent coffee grounds, it's not going to affect your soil. Okay, so coffee grounds are fine in moderation. I wouldn't dump a whole bag of coffee grounds around one little plant, but they are great for the garden. If you go to, what's the coffee place? Starbucks. If you go to Starbucks, a lot of them actually have a bin where they bag up the coffee grounds and you can take it for free. So every time I'm near a Starbucks, I check and see if they have any coffee grounds that they're giving away. Another thing that you can add to add nitrogen to the soil is blood meal and urea. And those are two products that you will see sold in garden centers and at big box stores. All of these things will help add nitrogen to your soil. Again, you want nitrogen when you want the plant to produce leaves. So at the very beginning, right? That's a good time to add some nitrogen. If you've got peppers and tomatoes and it's July and they're putting on fruit, that is not the time to add nitrogen to those guys. All right, so the next of the big three is phosphorus. Phosphorus helps with roots, right? It helps the plant develop good roots, healthy roots that can gather what that plant needs from the soil. So again, some things that we can add to the soil in order to add phosphorus are compost, grass clippings, bone meal, triple phosphate is like all phosphate. So these are all things that will help you get phosphate into your soil. And finally, potassium helps grow fruit, right? And that's what we want off of our tomatoes. It's what we want off of our peppers. It's what we want off of everything. So some things that you can add to your soil in order to boost the potassium is wood ash, potash, again, coffee grounds, right? Coffee grounds are just a powerhouse. Now there's an asterisk next to the wood ash because wood ash is also good for raising the pH. Okay, so if you have a wood burning stove and you have wood ash, you've got a good thing for your garden. However, moderation, right? We don't want to just dump a whole barrel of wood ash on the garden. Moderation. If I had a compost
Linda,
pile,
will you show
I would
that
also,
screen?
this
I
is
can't see
this,
that screen that you're talking about.
it says I'm sharing. All right, let me do this. Let me stop sharing and see if I can go back to it. Okay, Cynthia's asking, do we mix coffee grounds into the soil or sprinkle top and around the plant? I would just sprinkle, okay? All right, so let me go back to that screen and see if I can present. All right, can you see it now? Somebody tell me, because I can't see whether you're
No,
nodding
it's
or
just you. I just see you.
It is up?
Yes, it's up. It took a few minutes, but it's up.
Okay, all right. good. So, all right. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. The way to remember it is shoots, roots, fruits, right? We try to make things easy to remember. Shoots, roots, fruits. So, question, does somebody have a question? Okay. All right. So we talked about pH and we talked about NPK. So let's go now to that soil test that I was telling you about. Now, this is what I'm going to tell you. Soil tests are wonderful and they're fantastic. But if I had the choice of starting a garden without a soil test or not starting a garden, I would start the garden without the soil test. Okay. It's an important piece of information for you to be successful at gardening, but it's not anything that should keep you from starting your garden. All right, so the next slide. So what this is this is the actual results from the garden the year that I took it over from my uncle. All right, he had been growing there since the 1960s. He had never had a soil test. And he
Honey,
was
can
saying,
I ask, how much is the soil test?
so it's going to run around 20 bucks. It
Oh.
depends, like UMass will be different than UConn. Like you can shop around. You don't have to be a Massachusetts resident to send your soil samples to UMass. You don't have to be a Connecticut resident to send it to UConn. Okay, so any of your agricultural universities, the land grant universities, will run these soil tests for you. You can actually even buy tests like over the counter that you can do yourself. I'm not a fan of those. All right, spend the 20 bucks. It's not going to break you, and it'll pay for itself because you'll get more out of your garden. So basically, I decided I needed a soil test to know where I stood, right? And so all of these places that will do soil tests will have instructions on their website about how to properly take samples. In a nutshell, what you're going to do is you're going to dig 6-inch holes in several locations. Okay, wherever you're going to put your garden or wherever your garden is, you want to take samples from different places, right? And you're going to dig down 6 inches. You want a slice of all of those 6 inches. You're going to put it into a container. You're going to let it dry out, right? They don't want wet soil. And I think the rule is they want a cup. Not sure. All of that information is on their website. So what I do is I put it in a Ziploc bag. They have papers or forms that they want you to fill out. You mail it off to them, and then they email you back the results. Okay, so this was from UMass Amherst 2 or 3 years ago now. And so I want to go through it with you and show you how to interpret this. Okay, so number one here, right here, soil pH 5.3. Okay, this was not a surprise to me. But if you remember, we said our target was 6 to 6.5, right? So this tells me that my soil was way too acidic, okay? And I was going to have to amend it in order to get closer to that 6.5 range. Now here are the phosphorus and potassium. Okay, remember I told you we're not going to get a measurement on nitrogen. That's something we're just going to have to add no matter what. Phosphorus, as you can see, I was at a 1.9, optimal range 4 to 14. So I was low on phosphorus. Potassium, I was the target range, right in the middle there. So potassium is not something that I had to worry about at that point in time. So now the rest of these are the micronutrients. Okay. Now, as you can see, calcium, we need calcium in our soil. I'm low, right? 300, and I want to be at 1,000. Now, thankfully, the thing that I'm going to add to my soil to increase the pH is lime. And lime also contains calcium. Okay, so adding lime to my soil would kill two birds with one stone. My magnesium, I was okay. Sulfur, I'm low. I'm not worried about it. Same thing here with all these micronutrients. Now, the thing with the micronutrients is, this is a little bit tricky because it says right here, we have an optimum range, right? Not with micronutrients. They don't know what the optimum range is. These numbers right here are the averages in our area, okay? So I could tell that I'm below average in copper. I'm below average in zinc. I'm okay. I'm in the average range with manganese, right? I'm not worried about any of those things. And the reason I'm not worried about any of those things is because I'm going to be feeding my soil with compost. Hold on, let me get back to the slide here. I'm going to be feeding my soil with compost, and that will take care of all of these little micronutrients, right? The other thing here that I wanted to talk to you about that's important is, well, right down here too, the lead. If I can get this out. Right down here at the bottom, user error. Right down here at the bottom is lead, okay? That's important because you never want to grow in soil that has a ton of lead in it. So I was very happy to see low lead levels. My aluminum is higher than average. I'm not worried about aluminum. So the next important thing is this soil organic matter right over here. Now, organic matter in the soil is things like worm poop, decomposing leaves, decomposing roots, all of that good stuff, right? The stuff that is going to draw all of the microorganisms into your garden and make your soil better, right? Soil organic matter is at 4.5. Now, some places will tell you that 4% is a good number. I'm shooting for 6 to 8%. All right, I want good soil. I want it to be high in organic matter. So this is a number that for me is too low. Now, another thing that was important to me was this salt. Now, this is not included in most soil tests. I think I had to pay $5 extra to get it. But I needed to know that number. And the reason for that is I knew that my uncle was fertilizing the garden every year with chemical fertilizer, and I didn't know what he was using. And so this salt can be very, very high if you're using too much chemical fertilizer. Turns out my values are fine. I don't have to worry about salt, but it was well worth the $5 for that peace of mind. Okay, so the most important pieces here are the soil pH, the phosphorus and potassium, the lead, because you don't want high lead levels, and then the organic matter, right? All of this stuff up here, this exchange capacity is beyond the scope of a beginning gardener presentation. So if you are not a numbers person, they also give you this very nice picture, which I think is very nice of them, because immediately you look at this and I can say, okay, my phosphorus is very low. That needs to be an area that I concentrate on. My calcium is low. I need to get that back up. I don't have to worry about potassium, right? So what that means is when I go and buy fertilizer, I want that last number to be a 0 because I don't need it, okay? I want that second number to be high because I do need phosphorus, right? Good pieces of information to learn. So then the other piece of information that you get when you get your soil results back is this right here, all right? And so basically, this is telling me that in order to get a target pH of 6.5 in my garden, I need to add 15 pounds of lime per 100 square feet. It's also saying that I should add 0.25 or quarter pound of nitrogen per 100 square feet. Then it's telling me that I should add half a pound of phosphorus per 100 square feet to maintain what I have. And then 1/10 of a pound of potassium, okay, right? Because remember, I'm okay here, right? So this would be the maintaining, and then the phosphorus would be to increase to good levels. And then it tells you what to apply in order to get there, which I think is very helpful, right? So again, I need more phosphorus, so I would go down here and say, okay, I could buy some bone meal, I could buy some triple phosphate, right? Those are good choices in order to increase my phosphorus. So these 2 pages, again, if you go to UConn, you're going to get something similar. It's just not going to look the same, but it gives you a lot of good information, okay? So once you've determined where your garden's going, once you've determined what your soil looks like and what you need to do to your soil to improve it, now we get to the good stuff. What are we going to grow in this garden? And you guys, surprisingly, this is an area that a lot of people have trouble with. They don't know what to grow. They want to grow all the things. First of all, I would never recommend that a new gardener grow all the things. It's going to set them up for failure, right? So my suggestion for you is grow your grocery list. If you buy it in the store, it means you're cooking it. It means your kids are eating it. Your husband's eating it. It means you can grow it in the garden, okay? I will give you an example. First year I put my garden in, I had like 15 feet worth of eggplant. I'm the only person in the house at that time who ate eggplant. So I don't know what I was thinking growing 15 feet of eggplant. Turns out my husband will eat it if it's breaded and fried, but the kids still won't. So eggplant is one of those things that I'm probably not even growing this year, because if I want to make fried eggplant, I can go to the farmer's market and buy me an eggplant. So start with the vegetables that you already eat, all right? Look in your cupboards. Is there tomato sauce there? Then maybe you want to grow tomatoes, right? Look in your spice cupboards. If you have oregano and parsley and basil, then you should be growing those and not buying them, okay? So make a list of all of the vegetables that you know you and your family will eat and start there, right? Now, once you have your list, you may have to cull it, because especially if space is an issue, if you're starting small, you're not going to have room to grow the corn on the cob and the potatoes and all of that good stuff. So my suggestion to you is make it a money game. What can I grow in this minimal space that I have that will save me the most money? And the answer to that question is always tomatoes, right? Tomatoes are expensive. One plant will produce a lot of tomatoes, okay? So you will get your money's worth out of a tomato plant. Peppers are expensive, okay? So if you eat a lot of peppers, then you might want to grow peppers. Salad greens. You guys, they are so easy to grow. If you are salad eaters, then grow your lettuce. You will save a ton of money. Radishes, zucchini, summer squash, and all of the herbs, right? Studies have been done over and over and over again, and they have found that if you are a person who buys fresh herbs, then you will save significant money by growing them, because for dollar per square foot, your most bang for your buck is in the herbs. Okay, so now we know what we're going to grow. When should we grow them? Growing up, I knew my dad always planted the garden on Memorial Day. I think it's like written in stone somewhere that thou shalt plant your garden on Memorial Day if you live in South Central Massachusetts. I've also heard people say, I will never plant my garden before the first full moon or before the full moon in May. Okay, but the full moon could be May 4th one year and May 20th the next. That's not very helpful. Same thing with Memorial Day, right? It could be the 4th week in May one year, and it could be a week earlier than the next year. So we need something a little more precise than that. And that's where our frost dates come in. So we need to know when we're planting our garden, when am I least likely to get frost, right? Because frost is a killer for all of the tomatoes and peppers and all of the things we want to grow. So what I did here, and what any of you can do, is go to Google and put in last frost date and then your zip code. Okay, so this is for Dudley. This is on the Farmer's Almanac site. And it shows us here that the nearest station is Buffinville Lake, which is Charlton, Oxford area. It's close enough, right? So this tells me that my last spring frost is May 8th, and my first frost is October 1st. Now, if you've done any gardening in this area, you're like, wait a minute, May 8th is too early. And October 1st, last year, our first frost wasn't until like November 4th or something, or 2 falls ago. It was November 4th, something ridiculous like that. So what you need to do is not only ask yourself, what are the dates that they're telling me here, but what percentages are we dealing with? Because if you look here in the fine print, you will see that the last and first frost dates are 30% probability. So what that means is there's a 30% chance that May 8th is your last frost. That's not a game I want to play, right? That means 70% of the time you're going to have a frost after May 8th, okay? As far as the first frost goes, that means there's a 30% chance that you'll have frost by October 1st, but there's a 70% chance that it'll be after that. So these dates don't really tell me a whole lot of information once I know that we're dealing with a 30% probability, okay? So whatever website you go to, pay attention to the dates, but also pay attention to the probability. So what I did here was I was like, this is not good enough for me. I want something more. And so again, I entered in my zip code, frost dates, and Dave's Garden came up, this website right here. Now, I know from my time in the garden community that this is a pretty decent website with lots of good information on it. And so this right here gives me a whole lot more information, right? This tells me that there's a 10% chance of having a frost after May 17th. I like those odds a lot better than 70%, right? So May 17th would be a target date for you if you were comfortable with a 10% chance of having a frost after that. A lot of people go by the 50% frost date. Again, I don't like that. I don't want average, right? Average means half the time it's going to be before that date, half the time it's going to be after. That's not good enough for me. Okay, so you have to decide what you're comfortable with. Now, if you look here, this also gives you other temperatures. And that's really handy because tomatoes and peppers and all of the warm season crops that we're going to talk about in a minute, a 32-degree frost will kill them. They want the warm. But if you're growing lettuce and cabbage and broccoli, they're going to laugh in the face of 32 and they're going to be fine, okay? However, a 24-degree frost might kill them as well. Won't kill kale. Kale is hardier than that, but these temperatures are helpful to know depending on what you're planning to grow in your garden, okay? So what I have decided for me personally in this area is that anytime after May 17th, I know that I'm good to go 9 out of 10 years, right? So what I do is I look at the 10-day forecast. We're fortunate that we have that technology now. If I see in the 10-day forecast that we are not close to getting a frost, then I will go ahead and plant on May 17th, right? If it's questionable, then I may wait, okay? So we've got people mostly from New England, but some from other places. So your frost dates are going to be different, but it's important to know that frost date because there's nothing more frustrating to a new gardener than getting all these wonderful plants and putting them in the ground and then having them die because they planted too soon. Okay, so I mentioned cool season and warm season crops. It's important to know the difference between them because the cool seasons will survive a frost. They can take the cold. Warm seasons will not, all right? So cool season plants can be started earlier, right? I'm going to make fun of my dad here. I probably shouldn't, but like I said, Memorial Day every single year was when he planted the garden. Well, the cabbages went in on Memorial Day along with the tomatoes. He could have put the cabbages in a month earlier because they can take the cool, okay? So cool season plants can be started earlier. I will start my lettuce seeds in March. They can take the cold. Warm season plants, they're gonna pout if they get too cold, right? So common cool season plants are listed right here. They're your greens, right? Lettuce and kale and spinach, they will do fine. I have spinach that's green right now. It is still alive. It's not like growing, but it's living. Radishes, peas, potatoes, cilantro, parsley, they can all be in the ground before that last frost date. The warm season crops are things like tomatoes and peppers and zucchinis and cucumbers and melons and basil, right? They do not like to be less than 50 degrees, right? So I will keep my tomatoes and my peppers in the garage at night until the nights are in the 50s. Right. So now you know warm season, you know cold season. I am going to tell you, I don't care who you are, I don't care how long you've been gardening, these are the plants that you should never waste your money on. Now, you will walk into the big box stores and find these plants being sold. You will walk into the mom and pop garden centers and find these plants being sold. Do not buy them. Okay, so number one, cukes, zooks, squash, peas, beans, and any root vegetable like carrots and radishes. They do not like to be transplanted. They want to grow where they sprout and they want to take off from there. I did a little experiment this year because I had some family members who wanted me to start some cucumbers and zucchini and squash for them. And so I did. And I planted the seedling in the ground. And right next to it, I planted a seed. Same variety. And lo and behold, every single time, the plant that was planted from seed did better than the transplant. All right, so you may think you're buying yourself some time. It's not worth it. It's going to do better if you plant from seed, okay? Peas and beans, it just blows my mind that Home Depot will sell you a 6-pack of bean plants, right? It probably costs 25 cents for those seeds, and they're selling it to you for $4. It drives me crazy, right? So with that being said, now is the time to get the seeds for these vegetables if you want to grow them, right? Do not wait until it's time to plant because they will not be around. I have my toe in a lot of gardening waters. Baker Creek Seed Company, which is a big source of seeds, already shut their website down once to catch up on orders. They are now saying that orders are taking 30 days for delivery. Johnny's is a seed company in Maine. They have limited their gardener purchases to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And they are also experiencing delays in shipping. If you wait in order to buy seeds, they are not going to be around, right? We saw this last year. It's going to be more of a problem this year. Now, with that being said, I don't care where you get your seeds from. Go down to Ocean State Job Lot and buy packets of burpee seeds. Perfectly fine, all right? Just get them now so that you have them and you're not frantically trying to locate them when everybody else in the world has decided that it's time to plant cucumbers. All right, off my soapbox. So now, there are also some plants that are so quick and easy to grow from seed that it doesn't make any sense to pay $4 per plant when you can buy a packet of seeds for $2.75 and grow them for a couple of years, right? So that includes lettuce, kale, spinach, basil, parsley, cilantro, dill, marigolds, nasturtiums, and zinnias. Okay, all of those are very easy to grow from seed. Basically, you could just scatter the seed on the soil and they will grow. All right, there's nothing tricky about them. So if you want to grow these things, get your seeds now. Okay, so I just threw this one in. This is not edible, but I wanted to throw it in because every year on Facebook I try to post this public service announcement. Okay, this was taken at Lowe's. They're selling these mosquito plants, and it drives me crazy. The reason it drives me crazy is that people think they can put this plant in a pot on their deck, and voila, there will be no more mosquitoes. Now, I'm not going to say that the plant doesn't repel mosquitoes. It absolutely does. A lot of herbs do. However, in order to work, you need to pick the leaves, you need to mash the leaves, and then you need to rub them all over your skin. Okay? And yes, the mosquitoes will leave you alone. Lemon balm is great for this. Lemon verbena is great for this. Mint is great for this. Like anything that has a strong scent, the mosquitoes don't like, right? But the key is you need to pinch them good and rub them on your skin. You can't just put them in a pretty pot on the table and expect them to repel mosquitoes. All right, so that's your free little tidbit. So we've talked about what you should not buy. Now we're going to talk about what you absolutely should buy as beginner gardeners, okay? And these include tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. They are slow growing. They need a long season in order to produce fruit, and they're finicky, okay? So what I always recommend is that you take a couple seasons and get used to caring for plants, be successful growing them as plants, and then you can start thinking about starting them from seed, okay? There are great reasons to grow from seed. I start all of my tomatoes and my peppers this way, but it requires an indoor light setup, so there's money involved. Last year I grew 84 tomato plants. It was worth my while. If I was only growing 4 tomato plants, it's not going to be worth my while to have that light setup, okay? So buy the plants. I don't care where you get them from. They're going to grow tomatoes for you. What you want to do is look for thick, strong stems. A lot of people say, oh, I'm going to buy this one, it's taller, right? But bigger is not better when it comes to seedlings. The bigger plants tend to suffer more transplant shock, okay? So short and stocky is better when it comes to transplants. The smaller plants will absolutely catch up once you put them in the soil. You will be absolutely shocked at how fast they grow once their roots have a place to spread out. Some other plants that you should always buy are lavender, rosemary, and thyme. They are very, very hard to get to grow from seed. They are tricky to propagate. And so I recommend that if you want to grow lavender, rosemary, and thyme, spend the $4, put them in the ground, enjoy them. Okay. So let's talk about when to buy these plants, because you will see tomatoes for sale at Walmart and all of the big box stores insanely early, right? Just because they are for sale does not mean that it's a good time to put them in the ground. With that being said, this year of all years, as soon as you see them, you buy them, right? Assuming they look healthy, you see tomatoes plants for sale and you want to grow tomatoes, you buy those tomato plants. However, don't put them in the ground yet. You're going to keep them out in the nice, beautiful sun when it's a sunny day, but you're going to bring them into the house or the garage or whatever until the nights get into the 50s. And that's when you're going to plant them out. Okay? Also, don't procrastinate. Get them in the ground as soon as you can, and the nights are in the 50s. All right? Because the longer you leave them in the pots, they're just not going to be happy being there for a long time. All right. So if space is an issue, which it usually is, I have 23 30-foot rows and I don't have space to grow everything I want to grow. So this is what I recommend that you not grow if space is an issue. And the reason I'm recommending you not grow these is because, first of all, they're pretty cheap in the store. And second of all, they're space hogs in the garden. So you can get a lot more bang for your buck by growing the high value items that we talked about beforehand. So corn is just a space hog because you need a ton of space in order to get good pollination on your corn. Okay. If you plant, 9 plants in a block of 3 by 3, you're not going to get good pollination on them. You're not going to be happy, right? You need a big area for corn. Winter squashes, pumpkins, melons, same thing. Okay. They are space hogs and they're so cheap to buy. And the same thing goes with potatoes and sweet potatoes. I recommend that you grow cukes on trellises because they take up less room that way. Okay. We're almost at the end. We almost made it, guys. Before you plant or even buy a plant, this is what you should know about them. You should be able to say to yourself, I know that this is a warm season crop or this is a cool season crop. And the reason you need to know that is because it will tell you when it's safe to plant it outside in the garden. You need to know how much space it's going to need in the garden because you want to give it that space, all right? You don't want to crowd your plants, especially tomatoes. They need good airflow around them. Now, with that being said, 90% of the time, you can plant plants closer together than it says on the tag, right? You should also know if the plant is invasive or not, right? Right, Tanya Lee with the mint, right? We need to know if it's going to take over our space. We should also know if it's an annual, a perennial, or a biennial. And right now, some of you are like, what? What are those words? So an annual is a plant that completes its life cycle in a year. Most of the vegetables we grow in the garden, right? Tomatoes, for example, it starts from a seed, we plant the plant, it grows, we get fruit, it dies in a frost. 1 year life cycle, done. Perennials are like asparagus, right? You plant the asparagus in the ground, and assuming all goes well, you're going to have asparagus for 50 years. That's a perennial. And then there's plants such as parsley and carrots that are biennial. And what that means is it takes 2 seasons for them to complete their life cycle. So if you put a carrot seed in the ground this spring, you will get carrots in the fall. But if you don't harvest those carrots in the fall, they will be absolutely fine in the ground over the winter. And then the next spring, they're going to start growing greens. And then in the summer, they are going to bolt, which means they are going to go to seed and they're going to produce carrot seed, and then they're going to die. So it took them 2 years to complete their life cycle, and that's why we call them biennium. So you want to know what you're planting and when its life cycle is going to be complete. A very important thing to know, especially if you are planting from seed, is what are these seedlings going to look like? I had a neighbor in Virginia who planted carrots, and then she promptly weeded her carrots because she thought they were weeds. So know what your seedlings should look like so that you're not pulling them out of the ground. You should also know how it's pollinated. Am I needing bees or insects to pollinate this to get fruit? If so, then I want to make sure that I have bees or moths or whatever it is that's pollinating my plant. I want to draw them to my garden. Are they pollinated by the wind? Right? Corn is infamous for that. Corn needs wind to pollinate. Or are they self-pollinating? That means they don't need insects. Tomatoes will give you tomatoes whether there are bees or no bees. Okay, beans and peas will give you beans and peas regardless of pollinators because they are self-pollinating. And then finally, you need to know the light requirements of the plant, right? So we talked about this with greens. They need less light than, say, peppers or tomatoes. So you need to know how much light they want. You need to know how much water they want, how to care for it, and you also need to know when is this thing ready for harvest, all right? You don't want an eggplant that's been on the plant ripe for 5 months because it's not going to taste good anymore. So these are all things that you should know about any crop that you decide to grow. And thankfully, they're very easy to find on the internet just by Googling peppers light requirements or how are squash pollinated. Google is your friend. Okay, so the last part of this, I wanted to talk about planting for pollinators because some of the things that we are growing do require bees and butterflies and moths and insects in order to get a good production. Squash is one of them. It's always a good idea to interplant herbs or flowers in your garden to attract those pollinators. Basil is my favorite to plant with tomatoes. First of all, because it repels tomato hornworms, which everyone is going to deal with at some point in their life. And second of all, it's said to improve the taste of tomatoes. So I always grow basil around my tomatoes. Marigolds, you probably know, that's probably one of the most famous. They are great interspersed throughout the garden. Their scent repels a lot of bad bugs. Same thing with nasturtiums. Now, like 90% of the bugs that you see in your garden are actually going to be good bugs, right? The 10% can cause a lot of problems, but just because you see a bug in your garden doesn't mean you should kill it. Which brings me to this last paragraph here. I had a friend, she was growing parsley, and she kept seeing these worms on her parsley, and she was getting very frustrated because she had to kill these worms all the time. And I sent her a picture, and I said, did they look like this? And she said, yes, that's exactly what I've been killing. And I said, congratulations, you have just killed a bunch of black swallowtail caterpillars. You would have had beautiful butterflies in your garden had you not killed those caterpillars. So know what your bugs are before you start killing them. With that being said, if you plant parsley, cilantro, dill, or any other member of the carrot family, you will have these black swallowtail caterpillars on your plants. So before I harvest parsley or cilantro or any of those, I look at the stems and make sure there aren't any caterpillars on them. If there are, I move them. I have plants that are specifically designated as butterfly plants, and I move them to those plants. So I always plant extra parsley. I always plant extra cilantro. But they will show up on dill. They even show up, I didn't know this, but celery is a member of the carrot family. And I learned that because when we were in Virginia, I rooted some store-bought celery and I planted it out in the garden. And lo and behold, the black swallowtails the caterpillars were on the celery. So anything in the carrot family will, if you plant it, they will come. All right, I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. Does anyone have questions? Not hearing any. Okay.
Do you know any tricks for repelling Japanese beetles?
Yes, you put a Japanese beetle trap in your neighbor's yard.
Yes, I tried that.
Yeah,
I tried the bait. I've tried the, the scent baits on the other end of the yard, and then I used the traps.
yeah.
And it's still not very successful.
No, they are hard, hand picking, and then what I tell myself is there's a season for Japanese beetles. They are not going to last the whole season. So fortunately for me, I haven't had to deal with them. I think I have them on a rose bush, and it's not a rose bush that I really care about. So I just let them go. But they're hard. They're very hard to deal with. They come from grubs in the ground, and so when we had chickens in Virginia, we let them run in our backyard and they ate the grubs. So maybe get chickens and let them run.
I'll let them go. Of course, we have hawks too, so that's not
Yeah,
good.
right, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't have anything for Japanese beetles. They're just a bane.
Excuse me, Lynette.
Yeah.
So I've never planted from seeds.
Okay.
So obviously there's only my husband and I, so I'm not going to plant the whole packet. Are you
Right.
telling me I can save the seeds
Absolutely.
and use
So,
them?
most seeds are good for 2 to 5 years.
Wow. Excellent.
Tomatoes will last for like 15 years. The only ones that you have to worry about are onions, spinach. I haven't had good luck saving parsley seed for long, but they're very few. Most seeds will last for multiple seasons. And if you Google how long are pepper seeds good for, you will find all that information. And sometimes the window is large, right? Nobody on the internet says that tomatoes are good for 15 years. They always say up to 5 years. But one of the tomato guys that I follow has a rule of thumb. He tries to plant his seeds every 10 to 14 years because he's found that they're fine in that range. And then something happens between 14 and 15 where his germination rate will drop from like 90% to 60%. So there's still, like, he could still grow 15-year seeds, but the germination rate isn't as good. Okay, so yeah, seeds will last longer than they tell you they will.
Thank you. And what was the name of that first website you told us for seeds? It started with a B.
Okay, so Baker Creek is the name of the company. Their website is rareseeds.com. Now, I would not recommend Baker Creek for a new gardener.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why is because they have all of the things. They have the largest seed catalog. It's
I'd
very
be overwhelmed.
overwhelming. You want to grow everything.
Yeah.
Don't go there. Okay.
Ocean State job lot for me then.
Ocean State Job Lot is fantastic. If you want to order seeds, I would recommend High Mowing. They are a company in Vermont.
Okay.
Johnny's is in Maine,
Yeah,
and Fedco is also a good New England company to get seeds from.
thank you.
Yep.
Fedco.
Now, as far
What
as
was the
plant
first one? Hi, what?
high mowing,
Okay, thanks.
now that's for those of you who are in New England. So, Catherine, for you, I would recommend like Southern Exposure, because they're down. I think they're in Virginia or North Carolina. Like they're in your area. So it's always good to order seeds from companies that are, I'm not going to say local because it's not like they're in your backyard, but regional. Okay, because chances are the seeds that they are selling are going to be more adapted to your climate.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Now, the rule of thumb with seeds is you want to plant them twice. So you want to look at their width, right? Some seeds like dill are really tiny, and some seeds like pumpkin are bigger, right? So the rule of thumb is you take twice their width and you plant them that deep. And with little seeds, I literally just throw them on the ground. I scatter them, and sometimes I'll sprinkle some soil over them, and sometimes I won't. Seeds want to grow. So as long as they come in contact with soil and they have water, don't stress about planting seeds. It's better to plant them shallower, too shallow than too deep.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
And all of that information should be on the back of the seed packet.
Right, right.
Okay.
Have you ever planted any blueberry or raspberry bushes?
Yes, but I again would not recommend that for new gardeners.
You broke up.
actually-
What'd you say?
I wouldn't recommend that for new gardeners.
Yeah. I did buy a couple of blueberry bushes. So,
Did you get them in the ground in the fall?
yes.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I may have missed it, but can you talk about sunflowers?
Okay, so sunflowers, in my experience, do better if you plant them directly. I have started some from seed and transplanted them, and they've been okay, but I find that they do better if you plant them directly in the ground. And those are bigger seeds, so again, you can plant those deeper, but here's the deal. I grew sunflowers the first year in my garden, and I haven't grown them since on purpose because the birds have planted them everywhere in my garden and they grow, right? Now, the birds certainly aren't digging holes half an inch or a quarter inch deep and covering them with soil, right? The birds are scattering them on the ground and they grow just fine. Okay. So that's why
Shallow.
What?
Shallow?
Yeah. Yep. So once you've got your seeds in the ground or on the ground, you want to make sure that you keep them moist until they sprout. Because if a seed is trying to sprout and it dries out, it's a goner, unfortunately. So that's the downfall of planting from seed, is that you need to be on top of that watering regime until they have roots that can go deep down into the soil and gather the water. So speaking of water, the rule of thumb is that vegetables will need 1 inch of water per week and probably closer to 2 inches during the height of summer. Okay. Now, some people think that they're being wonderful gardeners by going out and watering their garden for 10 minutes every day. What that is doing is encouraging the roots to stay close to the surface, right? Because that's where the 10 minutes worth of water can be found. You're much better off watering deeply once a week so that the water seeps into the soil and the roots grow down, okay? I always recommend mulching your plants with shredded leaves or compost. First of all, mulching feeds the soil. We talked about introducing organic matter into the soil. So compost is going to feed the soil, but it's also going to help prevent water evaporation. Okay, so you will have to water less if you mulch your garden beds. Also, if you have, an inch or two of shredded leaves or compost on top of your soil, the weed seeds aren't going to like that and they're not going to sprout. So you will have much less weed pressure if you mulch your garden. With that being said, you will have weeds. Right? Personally, I'm really good at weeding my garden until about the middle of June. And then everything is taking off and needing my attention, and the weeds are at the bottom of the list. So in my garden, I do what I can, especially around the plants themselves. But in the walkways, I've got weeds, right? My garden is not a pretty place. There are weeds. The important thing is to pull them before they go to seed. All right. They're fine. I leave them. I don't worry about them in the walkways until I see that they have flowers on them. And the flowers tell me that these weeds are getting ready to set seed and I need to get them out of my garden, or else next year there's going to be even more of them. So be sure to pull the weeds. Like I said, whenever they flower, that's a sign. Get them out of there. And then it's been said, my favorite quote, the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. Okay, so spend time with your plants. You should be walking around your plants daily. This helps you see, first of all, are they wilting? Do they need more water? Are there holes in them? Is something chewing my plants? Or wait a minute, this leaf is turning yellow. What could that possibly mean? All right, so all of these things you're only going to notice if you are spending time, right? So don't think that you're gonna plant your garden and then come back 5 weeks later and enjoy the fruits of your labors, right? Be there every day. I have a table and a chair in my garden because I will sit down and I will take notes. This is my 2020 garden journal. This is my 2021 garden journal. Take notes, see what works. It's much easier if you have a table and chair right there in the garden. Probably not. All right, so I just want to show you these creepy crawlies so that you're aware of some things that you might see. Now this thing right here in the top left is a tomato hornworm. The first time you see one, you will swear you just met the devil incarnate. They are ugly. They have faces.
Yes. I wanted to run away and quit. That was the
Yes,
end.
right?
Yep.
Okay, and they will decimate your tomatoes, all right? They
Oh.
will eat the leaves in a matter of minutes, okay?
Devastated.
Usually, you don't see the tomato or the worms. What you will see is plain old stems that have been, left of leaves. And then you will also see poop, right? You will see the poop. It's big.
Yeah.
And so that's your hint that you've got a hornworm on your tomatoes. Now, they're hard to see because they look just like they're the same color as the tomato leaves. But if you take a black light and go out at night, they glow.
Oh.
So if you have a hornworm problem, get a black light. They're cheap. I didn't have any at all last year. And the only one that I had in my garden the year before that was on a tomato that did not have any basil planted next to it. So I am seriously, I think there's something to that planting basil by your tomatoes. I really do think it repels them. Now, this picture underneath the hornworm, so the bottom left-hand side, this is also a hornworm, but you will see that it has white things sticking off of it. If you see a hornworm that has these white things, you leave that puppy alone. And the reason for that is these white things are the eggs of a parasitic insect. It's a wasp. They will crawl into the hornworm and eat it from the inside out. And then they will do wonderful things in your garden. So if you see hornworms with the white things, let them be. Okay. Now over on the right side of the screen, this beautiful guy is a picture of the black swallowtail caterpillar. They don't look like this until they're ready to do their chrysalis thing. Sometimes they will look like the one in the top picture. And when they're really, really little, they just look like little black caterpillars, and they have a single white stripe on the middle of them, like horizontally, the short way. So if you see any 3 of those on a dill or a cilantro or a parsley, either let him be or move him to another plant that you've designated as your sacrificial butterfly plant. Another thing that you are likely to see is aphids, and that's the picture on the top left here. They can be yellow, they can be green, they can be white. They're just yucky, creepy crawlies, okay? If you have a hose nearby, you can shoot them off with powerful streams of water. I usually don't have a hose nearby or that will reach. So you can use neem oil to help get rid of the aphids. Neem oil is an organically approved oil that will help control chewing insects and chewing insects only, all right? So anything that's chewing on your leaves, neem oil will probably help. Now over on the right-hand side here, that ugly little green thing is a cabbage moth worm, and they will chew holes in every single leaf you have of cabbage or broccoli or kale or Brussels sprouts. Anything in that cabbage family, they're gonna eat. So if you can't protect the plants with netting, then I recommend what is called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis is the long name. But that will help with any worm type insect that is eating your plants. Now, the other thing that you might have problems with are slugs and snails and earwigs. Unfortunately, they come out at night, so you won't see them. You will only see the fact that something is chewing on your leaves, and there's no aphids there. You know, there's no visible insects chewing your leaf, but yet it has holes in it. And so for that, I highly recommend Sluggo or Sluggo Plus. They are organically approved. Basically, I think it's copper, or no, it's not copper. Copper, you can put copper strips around your plants because they won't crawl over them. It might be iron. I forget what the active ingredient is in Sluggo, but it's organically approved. All right. The most important thing is never randomly apply anything to a plant unless you know exactly what it is you're dealing with. And then it's important to only apply what will effectively kill that problem, okay? So Google everything, right? If you see a black bug with orange stripes on your cucumbers, then Google black bug orange stripe cucumber, and something will come up, and you can figure out exactly what it is you're dealing with before you start throwing chemicals at it. All right, this is the fun page. I love watching YouTube videos on gardening, especially this time of year when like I'm itching to be out there and I've got cabin fever. So I wanted to give you a list of my favorite sources. So for YouTube videos, MI Gardener has a ton of good content. You can just Google like MI Gardener eggplant, and up will come his video. It's a complete growing guide on everything you need to know about growing eggplant. Okay, so he's a great resource. He also has a seed shop. The Impatient Gardener does a little bit of vegetable gardening. She mostly does flowers. The Rusted Garden is mostly all edible gardening. He is a great resource. And then Garden Answer is another YouTube channel that I love. Again, she mostly does flowers, but she does have some edibles too. And then as far as podcasts go, whenever I go for my walk, I'm listening to a gardening podcast. And so my two favorites are the Joe Gardner Show and You Bet Your Garden with Mike McGrath, which it used to be on public radio. But if you just Google Mike McGrath, You Bet Your Garden, it'll come up for you. And this handsome man pictured is none other than Joe Lample of the Joe Gardner Show. I absolutely love him, and I got to meet him in Virginia. So that was a highlight of my gardening career. All right. So if you don't remember anything about tonight, except for 4 things, I want these to be the 4 things. Number 1, get your supplies now, okay? Seeds, soil, tools, pots, whatever. Get it now. Do not wait because you will regret waiting this year, okay? I have 3 huge bags of potting soil in my garage that I made my husband pick up months ago because I wanted to make sure that I had them. Okay, so number 1, get your supplies now. Number 2, start small. And I couldn't help it. Don't use landscape fabric. I hate that stuff. It's awful. Don't use it. So it's easy to get overwhelmed and defeated. Don't take on more than you are able. Start small and gradually increase, and you will thank yourself for it. Number 3, never stop learning. That's what I love about gardening. No matter how long you've been doing it and how good you think you are at it, Mother Nature always has something to throw at you, and there is always something to learn, okay? So along with that, never give up, right? There's always something to learn. We're never going to be experts. If you have failures, and you will every single year, just learn from them, but don't be defeated by them, right? Keep a garden journal, write down what worked, write down what didn't, and don't give up. Yay! We're in the end. All right.
Yay, thank you. That was awesome.
Let me get out of that and stop sharing.
Yeah, we don't
Okay.
see it anymore.
Do you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You gotta love technology.
Yeah.
Okay. Throw your questions at me.
When you're talking about wood ash for
Uh-huh.
protecting what was it, the phosphorus, was it?
Yep.
Earlier. Can you use the ashes from wood pellets?
So my gut says yes. I would just make sure they haven't been treated with anything, but I don't think that they have.
Okay.
If you have any question, what I might do is throw them on the compost pile, because the act of composting takes care of a lot of problems, if you will. It kills diseases. It mitigates harmful chemicals. So if you have any doubts, just throw them in the compost pile.
Okay.
I have a question about the shredded leaves.
Mm-hmm.
How do you shred leaves?
So how we shred them is we run them over with our lawnmower.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that some leaf blowers have a reverse setting that will vacuum them and shred them into a bag. I've never had one, so I don't know how they work, but I know they exist. So yeah, the lawnmower is the easiest
Okay.
way I've found. Yeah. Yep. And I have, so I like to mulch my pathways in the garden to try to stave off the weeds. And so last year we had, it was actually Marcia's husband who came and ground a lot of stumps for us. And so I took all those wood chips and I lined the garden pathway with them, but we used them all up. And so this year we're lining our garden pathways with the shredded leaves, but it takes a lot of shredded leaves to line the pathways. And so I asked my neighbor to save his leaves for me because he's got a lot of trees. And so he bagged up his leaves. And then he also takes care of his other neighbor's yard because she's very old. And so he bagged up all of her leaves. And then we
Wow.
had all of our leaves. So literally we have a mountain of bagged shredded leaves waiting for us. And we left them in bags, first of all, because it was easier to transport them. And second of all, because it will help break them down and create what is called leaf mold. And that's a very good thing when it comes to the garden. So if you have trees and you have a garden, do not get rid of your leaves. Like it, in fact, there are a lot of people who will go around and throw, like, people put their leaves on the side of the curb for pickup.
Mhm.
Yeah, they'll make their own pickup. And
Why did you never tell me this? I would have given you tons of leaves.
because I really don't need any more leaves this year. Did I mention I have a mountain of leaves? So, but now you can keep them for your own garden.
All right.
Um,
I somehow don't
another-
think my garden will be that big.
yeah. But you reminded me that another good resource is composted manure. So if you have farms near you, you might want to talk to your farmer about manure. Now, you need to do research because all manure is not created equal. Okay. Horse manure needs to sit for a long time so it's not hot. And by hot, we mean too much nitrogen. Okay. If you put
Yes.
too much nitrogen, it's going to burn your plants. Right. The other thing that can happen with horse manure is they can be eating hay that's been treated with chemicals that are bad for plants. So if you put that contaminated poop on your garden,
Oh, yeah.
your plants are going to die, right? So you need to be very careful of the source if you're using composted manure, but it can be used very, very effectively.
My sister-in-law calls it liquid gold.
Yep, liquid gold. Yep, yep,
But like you said, it can burn. You shouldn't use it straight.
right.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you're local to the area, I know that Kebke's Walnut Lane Farm in Dudley, they take very good care to make good compost. They try very hard to mix in a proper percentage of browns and greens, if you will.
Mhm.
They sell it bagged, but they will also load a pickup truck for you. I know that I think it's Farm to Table in Woodstock. The 4-H kids sell some of their compost there. I don't know if it's all year round or if it's just certain times. I was fortunate enough last year. Our youth group was raising money for a trip that they're taking, hopefully in 2020. And one of the farmers offered, we had a silent auction and we could bid on a delivery of compost. And so he brought a whole dump truck of wonderful composted manure. And it took us a whole year, but we have finally used up all of that manure and I need more. So there are sources out there, but just be very, very, very careful what you're using because you never want to put anything in your soil that could harm it. All right, what else we got? Nothing?
Well, last year number one, I don't get more than 6 hours of sun.
Okay.
I have 4x4, 4x4 raised beds.
Mm-hmm.
The first year, a couple of years ago, I planted a lot of tomatoes. They came up, they were great, but I did get those bugs.
Yep.
Last year was a funny year. They didn't ripen.
It didn't ripen.
tomatoes. No, they took an awfully long time. No, I
Were
didn't know.
they the same variety or were they a different variety than you've grown before?
Well, yeah, they were different varieties. I bought them from a farm in Thompson.
Okay. So with tomatoes, you have
Uh,
early season, you have mid-season, and you
Yeah.
have late season.
Yeah,
And so I grew a variety this year that was 50 days. And when it says 50 days on the tag for tomatoes, that means from the day that you transplant them, not the day that you seed them. And so they were very quick. And then I had others that were like 90 days. And so
wow.
obviously they took a
So
lot
long.
longer.
Yeah,
So ideally, if you have room, plant an early, a mid, and a late so that
Yeah.
you have tomatoes early and late.
yeah. That's why, and this woman plants from seeds, so that's why I wondered if the seeds were old.
I don't think that if the seeds were old, they wouldn't germinate and that wouldn't have
Okay.
affected you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. They do need sun to ripen, so it could be
Yeah.
that they weren't getting enough.
Lack of sun. Yeah, that's
So
right.
what you might do if you have that problem again is as soon as you see, tomatoes are green.
Yeah.
And then they start blushing around the top when
Yeah.
they start ripening.
Yeah.
As long as they have some ripe on them, you
Yeah.
can pick them and they will continue to ripen off the plant. So you might do that and just, put them in a sunny windowsill and let them ripen that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I have another question.
Yes.
Said to always keep the seeds moist.
Mhm.
So what does that look like practically? Like, are you watering like morning and night or like?
No, not morning and night, unless so where we are and when it's time to plant, so at the end of May, we're usually still getting decent amount of showers, right? And the sun is not bearing down on us. Okay, so usually I will water once a day. All right, where you are, you might have to water twice a day. You don't want the soil to be soaking wet. You just don't want it to be bone dry either.
And what time of day do you usually water?
So it's always best to water before 10 in the morning. You don't want to water at
I'm
night.
not a morning person.
Oh, geez.
You don't want to water at night because you don't want your leaves wet at night because that invites disease. And then if you water during the height of the day, most of it's going to evaporate. So before 10 o'clock is the ideal time to water.
Okay.
And and I heard that in an ideal garden that you should have irrigation like underneath. Yeah.
Yeah, drip irrigation. Unfortunately, a friend of mine in California asked me about that this summer. He's like, I don't understand why New England people don't have irrigation.
Mhm.
And I said, well, most New England people are on wells. And if you need to water your garden, it means there's no rain, which means there's no water in your well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that can be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just try not to water the leaves.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. You always want to water the base of the plant, not the
Yeah.
leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, now you're getting me excited. Awesome.
It's time. We're getting there.
Well, last year I was kind of, like I said, disappointed with the tomatoes and yeah.
You don't remember what kind of variety it was?
Oh, this woman had all kinds. Like I had black crim,
Uh-huh.
um, and I always buy a aroma.
Yep.
Yeah, and some small cherries. Yeah,
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't mention this and I should have. Cherry tomatoes are very easy to grow.
yeah,
So highly recommend them for beginner gardeners. Full-size tomatoes can be tricky. They can have diseases.
yeah.
Like everything can go wrong with tomatoes, but cherry tomatoes
True.
will grow and grow and grow.
Yeah,
So that's a good place to start.
yeah.
But now if you had had a garden journal, you could flip back to the page and
Yes.
say, oh, it was the 1884 tomatoes that didn't ripen for me.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome.
Nothing else? Oh my gosh, it's 9 o'clock. Woo! All right. Well, what I want you ladies to do, or Sean, if you're still here, and men, is I want you to email me at armstrongacresma@gmail.com what you want next. Like, what do you have questions on? Where do you want to go next as far as your gardening knowledge? Matt wants to grow onions.
Not in my garden, he's not.
Yes, I am. I'm planting my own.
I gotta plug my computer in. Hold on. I have actually never grown onions, but I do have some walking onions that he is more than welcome to if he would like to grow them. Nobody's got any more questions. Okay, so like I said, email me. We will do this again if you want. Like, I love gardening. I love talking about gardening. For those who are local, depending on how COVID goes, like I would love to like have you come to my garden and see what works and what doesn't, because we've got lots of failures going on too. So it's always a learning experience. And nobody has brown thumbs. All right. Thanks for coming. Email me if you have questions. Tell me what
Thank
you
you
want.
so much, Nat.
You're welcome. Good to see you,
Good
Catherine.
to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye. What? It's okay. It's not class, Sean. I'm not writing detentions. Oh, how did you do that? Oh, thank you. All right, don't worry about it. Perfect. Because I I was like, what's going on? Why don't I have the button? The record button is right there. And then I realized, oh, because the